I wanted to ask a few questions, kind of following up on what you were saying, Mr. Yamamoto. You described what is needed, in the future: dialogue, communication, political space, technical assistance, and capacity building. And I've not had the opportunity to travel to the DRC, but everything that, I've read and in the hearings, it sounds as though a situation of chaos is there. So how do you have dialogue, communication, political space, TA, and capacity building in the midst of chaos is one question. And then I want to switch reels in a minute and talk about the minerals, but I just want to understand what is the impact, or what has been the impact, of our statements as the United States regarding the elections and the situation in the DRC.
Well, let's go to the last part first. I think the statements have been very important because, A, it underscores, I think, our position and also credibility of what we have observed in the electoral process. It also calls to all the parties, not only the government but also the opposition, that this is what we've seen, this is the problems, these are the issues that we need to resolve, and this is the way forward. The other issue, too, is to work with the neighboring states on what is happening in the Congo precisely, so that no one misinterprets or misunderstands what's happening, or that the commitment from the international community in the United States still remains very important to that region and also to the neighboring states. But more important is the private dialogues that we have made with Mr. Tshisekedi and Mr. Malunda, and of course the President himself, on where we see and what we can do together to ensure that this does not spiral out of control, and what steps are necessary to restore confidence and trust in the people of the Congo in the electoral process. And it's going to take time. As to your first question, how do you bring chaos, or how do you bring order to what seemingly looks like chaos? It's going to take time. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. But I think the areas that we're focusing on are the right areas that we need to focus on. It's going to be, in the short term, is to build that confidence, to build the communications, to build transparency, and over the long term, to dedicate and commit towards capacity building, judicial reforms, political reforms. And I'd like to defer also to my colleagues who are really at the forefront of on some of these programs.
But I mean, we started off this hearing talking about, in the hour that we have this hearing, how many women are going to be raped.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
I'm having difficulty understanding the difference that we make. Do we consider the Kabila government, do we consider it legitimate? I mean, what leverage do we have?
The leverage is not just with the President, with President Kabila and his government. The leverage is with all the parties together. Let me just give you an example. Between 2003 and 2006, with our tripartite group, we made about 26 visits to the region to understand better what we need to do, what the problems were. But more important is, by our mere presence in these remote areas, is to underscore that we're committed to finding a solution. I think the groups that we deployed, not only from the embassy but also from the Department of State, also the support for the other organizations, underscores that we remain committed towards finding solutions and towards working with the people of the Congo. Yes, it's going to be hard, as you say. The problems are enormous, but we need to tackle them one step at a time, issue by issue. And I think over the long term there will be a tremendous amount of progress.
Secretary Baer, Mendelson.
Thank you. I agree with Ambassador Yamamoto. I would just say that when we look back 10 years ago, there were thousands of people dying every day, and one of the things, unfortunately, that we've been working on is preserving enough stability to make the incremental progress that he described. And unfortunately, when you have a territory as large as the Congo is, with as little development as the Congo has, as poor of a justice sector, and as poorly controlled of a military, the challenges can seem insurmountable. I think that Secretary Clinton's visit to Goma 2 years ago underscored her personal commitment, particularly on the fight against sexual and gender-based violence. Undersecretary Otero went to the Eastern Congo last October. Assistant Secretary Carson has on numerous times engaged with the government on this. So I think our engagement is important. I think one of the things that our
engagement... Is the communication such that, like, the majority, well, I don't want to say the majority, but who knows that we go?
Oh, people, I was going to say, I think one of the most important effects of our engagement is that it gives credibility to the people on the ground who are engaging. If you look at the election context, you know, one of the most loud voices in the domestic context has been the Catholic Church. And to the extent that the international community is calling out concerns and flaws, it gives credibility to those domestic voices who are also calling out their concerns. And we all recognize that in order to solve the governance challenges from which the violence flows, that there is going to have to be a political solution at the domestic level. It's not going to be, in the end, it will be with our support, but it is not going to be of our doing. And it is going to be of the doing of the Congolese people. And to the extent that we can give credibility to those voices that will be part of that political solution, our voices add value to theirs.
I've been working on, as this biography suggested, political transition for over 20 years, and it's a nonlinear path. And I think that, again, when you look at this election versus 2006, what's really striking about it is that the international community did not shepherd it. It was the Congolese, and there are going to be setbacks and certain parts that did go well. Election day itself, which was much more peaceful, very large turnout. I think it's the idea that there's tremendous chaos and that we can't do any kind of assistance in that or development work in that environment isn't borne out by the actual impact that some of our investments have. I share your concern both in terms of the gender-based violence and the human trafficking costs. I think that the administration is very devoted both to the National Action Plan. We're really focused in on post-conflict and conflict regions and trying to come up with measurable interventions that we can be held accountable for. We're about to launch a new counter-trafficking policy at USAID in the next couple of weeks. We're going to increase modestly our investments in combating trafficking in the DRC. So we understand this is a larger piece than we alone can do, but we are very focused on trying to find evidence-based programming interventions that we know are going to work.
If you don't mind, Mr. Chair, could I just ask a couple more questions?
Congresswoman, you can have all the time that you need.
Thank you. I wanted to switch reels for a minute, and I believe that Dr. Baer had mentioned earlier about U.S.-issued guidelines regarding the mineral trade, and I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about that. I'm specifically interested in who's involved in the mineral trade. Are there a lot of U.S. companies involved, or are there European companies? Who's engaging in the mineral trade?
Historically, the mineral trade has included every range of actors that you described, from the small shop or the one-person show that sells to a middleman that sells to a middleman that sells to a middleman, to large multinationals. I don't know which U.S. firms are operating there now, if any. I know that many firms have, because of the violence, either made initial planning missions but have not chosen to develop mining operations, et cetera, or have paused or withdrawn. I believe Rio Tinto is still operating, but I think Freeport McMoran has ceased recently. I may be getting them inverted, but so there are a range of firms operating. I think
are those firms here? I'm not familiar with those names.
Freeport McMoran is Rio Tinto is Australian. Freeport McMoran is it may be a U.S. firm, I'm not sure. In any case, they operate with Congolese partners in most cases as a joint venture. The challenge, though, for whoever the operator is, whether it's a domestic Congolese operator or an international firm, the challenge is making sure that the supply chains are secure, being able to know the provenance of the minerals, because what happens is the revenues get siphoned off at various side points or get smuggled in.
Corruption.
Through the minerals get smuggled into a clean supply chain, allowing rebel groups to fund their activities. And so the reason why the international community is focused on that is to try to starve the rebel groups of this source of funding. And of course, the rebel groups have been primary perpetrators of the sexual and gender-based violence. I think it's a good thing that the OECD has developed guidelines on due diligence for supply chains, and we expect that as companies learn how to better implement those guidelines, that will help solve parts of the problem. But to be completely straight with you, it's a monumental practical challenge given all of the challenges that we've already described, the vast distance, the lack of police, et cetera. It is a huge challenge, and it'll be one going forward, but it's one that that responsible companies are going to figure out a way to solve. They figure out a way to solve problems with supply chains of all sorts all over the world, and they will figure out how to solve it, and we continue to look to them to make progress on that.
And just to add to Dan's comments is, we still await the Security and Exchange Commission issuance of the new regulations under Section 1502, because this will increase the confidence of U.S. firms of what the regulations and the guidelines are in operating in the Congo, so that they can make the adjustments. Right now, not knowing what the regulations are, it creates a lot of insecurity and questions about how they can manage the conflict minerals. And also it has repercussions on the people of the Congo in that area as far as unemployment and other issues. But I think after the regulations are issued, that would help. In the meantime, the ICGLR, which is the regional groups, are making plans, are moving forward. We continue to talk to the American businesses about the trade in the Congo, because we need to be there.
And can I get that information somewhere, like who is involved? Because I'm just wondering when we're talking about civil society and all that, I'm just wondering if there is a way that they can be engaged, some of the major, companies, whether they're U.S. or otherwise.
Sure, we can provide you that information, and we'll come and brief you privately.
Oh, I would appreciate that.
Thank you.
One of the initiatives that we have engaged with U.S. firms on, as well as other multinational firms, is called the Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights, which has to do specifically with the private security contractors and public security forces that multinational firms use to protect their assets, and making sure that they are trained and ensuring their respect for human rights. And so that's something that we've discussed both with the Congolese government and with multinational firms. When I was in Kinshasa last June, I had a small meeting with a number of firms that are represented there. So we are working with firms on that. And to your question about civil society, there is a very, against all odds, an extremely vibrant civil society in Eastern Congo that works on issues like this every day. And many of the firms that are operating there are in contact with them, and that partnership is certainly going to be part of the long-term solution.
Okay, great. I love those firms too, these security firms.
May I add that USAID has a very interesting responsible minerals trade program that began in FY10, and it's got three basic components. It's about infrastructure and regulatory reform, the protection of communities and child-free certification, and technical assistance to develop a pilot program for this conflict-free minerals supply chain to get sector users involved. And we have an extractive industries advisor currently out in the East with a group of users to explore how to work together. We can get you additional details if you want.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.